Okay. All right. So hi, everyone. My name is Joshua Granick. Unfortunately, Dave Ballmer, my good friend, is not able to be here. I hope you've been having a good conference so far. And so I apologize in advance if any of this is a little bit bumpy, because it is Dave's slides. But we're going to do the best that we can. There's some really great stuff here. So let's move forward. So HTML5 is not just animations. So if you want to create an application, you can do it with HTML5 more and more. I got started with Dave Ballmer at the WebOS team. And so I got warmed up with HTML5, creating applications. I created a Bible application using SQL, doing data stores and everything else in JavaScript. And it was a really great first experience at the direction that, that the browser has taken to more and more doing an app-like experience. So it's more than just a website. It's more than an animation. But you really can do a mature application, and especially with WebOS, obviously, and also with BlackBerry, I've been really impressed with the progress that the team has made, making Sencha Touch, making jQuery, BBUI, all of these different methods that you can get a BlackBerry look and feel using web. And so you can choose what works best for you, use the language that feels most comfortable to you, that you're not forced into a single technology to get an app experience. You can use the technology you want to use. So HTML5 is perfectly suited for layout, it's perfectly suited for content, but behind that, in order to make that deliver what you want to do. So in my case, because I was doing a Bible application, it was very heavily driven by data. If I couldn't have stored data and used a good data storage mechanism on the device, the entire application wouldn't have worked. It's not, and so depending on the type of application you're going to use, you're probably going to want storage of some kind, whether it's something very lightweight or something more robust. So BlackBerry 10 has first-class support for HTML5, and so we have quite a number of types of support for data storage. We're leading support. I'm sure you've heard it many times, and if you haven't, I'll say it again, html5test.com, among other websites that rate browsers based on how well it supports the standards and how well it implements all these features. We're number one. And Chrome and Opera are constantly competing for who's number two and who's number three, but we're number one, and I think that that's great. And again, coming from WebOS, it's been really refreshing, because it's one thing to say we believe in the web, but it's another thing to say we believe in it and we're backing it up with our actions. We're going to follow through, and we're going to say, we bring the browser, you bring the web. Whatever you want to do, do it. I also had the opportunity to go to jQuery conference, and everything that everyone threw at it worked. And so that was great. Unfortunately, that is not always the case, and I'm sure if you've been doing HTML5 for a while, that's not always the case. You can't just say, oh, I'm sure it'll work. You throw it on a new device, a new browser, and you have a new headache. So BlackBerry 10, HTML5, yes. So cookies, you don't want to use cookies. We don't need cookies. We can move on. The data storage APIs will let you work offline, which of course is important for an application. You can work persistently, store it on the device, make it an application. And at the end of the day, like our web browser is HTML5, I don't know if users are going to notice. It's not going to be the same experience that you might have on other platforms. Oh, this one's native, and oh, this one they're trying to use JavaScript to do this one. We want to have a consistent experience no matter what technology you're using. So BlackBerry 10 supports a wide variety of data storage mechanisms. So you can use local storage, you can use indexDB, you can use the file APIs and the FileReader class. You can use application cache. And I believe we have some SQL support. Dave is the expert on that. He's actually, not everyone can say, I've written the book on HTML5. Dave has. So at the end of this, we're going to take questions, and we're going to answer everything we can. But if we can't, we have a whole team of people here who are the experts who will be able to help you. Otherwise, Dave is sick, but he'll have access to Twitter and be able to help you there as well. So local storage is easy and fun. It's key value pairs. So you can store, so like a cookie is just one string, and that's it. And it adds overhead every time you access the server. But for local storage, you can do a key value pair. So you can set, everything does get saved as a string. So if it's an object, it's going to call to string and stringify that. So this is ideal, kind of for persistent data that's not as much, it's not storing a database worth of content like I needed. It's something smaller, remembering a high score or remembering which page they were on last. If you wanted to create an application where they close it and it resumes wherever they were. So it's a simple, straightforward API for that. It is stored on the device and gets loaded right up. So it's on window, it's globally accessible. You can use local storage, and you can set an item, give it the name, give it the value, and then at any other point, you can call get item, and you'll get that value back. So depending on what you're doing, that's straightforward. That's kind of the simplest you would go. So the benefits of local storage, it's super easy to use. It's broadly supported on multiple platforms. So if you're designing this not only for the device, but also for the web, this is something that works across the board. It's easy to use. But unfortunately, it does have a limited capacity. If you want to store a lot of data, this isn't the way to do it. And it doesn't have any querying capabilities. So if you know a single value and you want to retrieve a single value, that works. But if you wanted to do something more complex, wanted to sort through that data, then IndexedDB and some of the other APIs would be a better way to go. Sure. Uh-huh.
So BlackBerry team was telling that 25 MB is the limit which BlackBerry is giving for storage.
Okay, that's good news. Per site. Okay, so
Is it just for local storage it is 1 MB out of that 25?
That could also be based on were they talking about the local key value pairs, or were they talking about the SQLite?
all offline. Okay. So it's possible, and perhaps Laurent can answer. So we had a question about, so 25 megabyte storage, is that for all storage mechanisms?
Everything per origin,
Per site.
Local session, local IndexedDB, SQL, file system, everything is shared 25
Is that most desktop browsers?
No, this is wrong. Well, like the previous limitation was 5, and basically got moved up to 25.
So depending on the platform. Okay. So depending on the platform that you're using, local storage may be limited. So it sounds like we have a 25 megabyte limit on what we'll allow from a website. But if you're using another browser, depending on the version, there may be a limit there. And if you have a lot of data, it may load slowly compared to some of the other methods. So it's a string. If you want to use local storage and you want to store anything more than something simple, you might use something like JSON to stringify it and parse it. But again, there are more robust data structures that you probably would want to use in that case. So like we were saying before, it's good for something simple. But IndexedDB is much more powerful. So IndexedDB has benefits similar to SQL and or a disconnected database, CouchDB, or object-based database. You get faster index and faster searches. So if you have a lot of data to tear through, or you want to analyze your data from different perspectives, it's going to give you an ability to do that. It works asynchronously, so you're waiting for a callback, unlike local storage, which is synchronous. And it's more of an object. So it's not a string. We're working with objects. So the downsides is that it does have a bigger learning curve. Local storage is just, it's a single line of code. It can't really get any simpler than that. And it does require more code. And so depending on the browser and what platform you're working with, the support is spottier. But Dave says that the support is growing. And we support it on BlackBerry 10.
And this is still very much a standard in the making. So there was an old version, old by web standards, like 6 months. There's the current version, and there are expected changes to come up as well. So this is replacing WebSQL, which failed in the standards simply because of reference implementations. The W3C has a requirement that every spec has to have at least 2 independent implementations, and WebSQL only had 1. IndexedDB, people are still uncomfortable with it because there are only 2 implementations that exist out there. So they want more variety. So expect a few changes, but it is usable currently. It performs really well, and you can sort of use the applications for that.
So we've got some code examples here. So the idea of how this works, so there's an indexDB object. And so you could use that to open. So Laurent, do you know what the two parameters are on opening an indexDB?
I did not know there was a second parameter. The first parameter is the name of the store. So you could have multiple stores that are independent. Maybe the second one is just a comment or a label, a description. Yeah.
OK. So you would open it up. If it doesn't exist, it will help create it. If it does exist, it's going to be loading the data you already have. It has a versioning system to help make sure that you're working with the same schema that you're expecting. So you can create an object store. The first parameter is the name of the object store. And then you can do an unlimited number of parameters based on additional fields that you want to use when things are added to that store. So it's pairs of two. So the first one would be the name of that additional field, and the second is if it's going to auto-increment. So in this case, what Dave's doing in his code is he's adding an ID field every time you push something into the object store, and it's going to auto-increment. So similar to what you would get for most databases, where every time you add an entry, it's going to increment from an ID of 0 all the way up. So he's added that there. So if you wanted to sort later, index later based on the order that it was put into the database, you could use that.
So here the stuff is the database and object is the bookmark.
I mean, for people who have familiarity with SQL, think of bookmarks like a table. ID is the primary key, and it's an auto-increment kind of spec here. And then stuff is the name of the database.
Yeah.
You could create more than one objects within the database.
So once you have one, you can open up bookmarks. So this is like you've already created your so let's see. So back here we created our object store. We set up our database, and so now we're opening up our database and we want to put some data into it. And so unlike local storage, which was a string, this is a JavaScript object where we're able to put in multiple fields. And so depending on the names of these fields, we can sort later and query later based on these fields. So the object here, we have developer.blackberry.com with the title of BlackBerry Developer, and the rating is awesome, of course. And so once we've got data in the database, you can start creating indexes. And if you're used to working with databases, used to working with SQL, this would be familiar. So we're creating an index called title. Let me see, it's indexing based on, so similar to the one before, where you can do multiple pairs, you can continue on the call based on what you want to index by. So we want to index by title, and the next parameter is whether we want it to be unique. So in this case, we are going to assume that you might have more than one because it looked like it was websites. So you have URL, title, and you might have a rating to a website. So in this case, you might have more than one website that has the same title. So we have false. But if you wanted something where you wanted a unique return object, you could say true, and it will only return a maximum of one object on that when you return that. So we open up the index for title, and then we call get on BlackBerry Developer, and it's going to return back that object. Laurent, do you know if that object that it returns, if it returns the object or if it returns an array of objects?
It returns an array of objects. Like here, the index is not unique.
Yeah.
So it returns an array. If the index is unique, I forgot if it still returns an array that just happens to have one element, or it just returns a single element. I don't remember.
So there's also some cool things you can do here after you get you get a list of results back. So there's a key range object here that is using to sort through and find results that only have that are between the letters A and C. So if you want to learn more about how to use key range and other ways of sorting data, there will be information on the internet, but it's supported, and it looks like a really great way to, first it's one thing to get exactly the values you want that are matching what you're looking for, but to be able to, perform more intelligent searches on it.
One thing I don't remember as well, is if you are trying to put an object against a unique index and it violates the primary key. I forgot some APIs return an exception. Others is actually a handler. So this is one area of the spec. It's a handler. But some APIs do throw an exception. So this is an area of the spec that is expected to change as well. It's a little bit messy there.
So if you're using IndexedDB, the querying engine is robust, but depending on what you're doing, it may start to get a little bit more complex. So the idea is that this can replace SQL, accomplish a lot of the same functionality, but the way that it's used obviously looks a little bit different. And if you have a lot of data, this is a much better way to store it. I mean, in theory, you could use 1 million local storage objects, but this is just a better way to go, and I think the performance of this is designed better. So if you use it for complex things like, so if you have a lot of data to work with, anything beyond something that would be a single value, something that's more of an object-based or table, something that you would normally put in SQL, this is a much better match for that type of data. So JavaScript can read and write files. So with the File API, we do support the FileReader class to be able to read in files to a file object in JavaScript. So pros, obviously, you get to touch files, which is one of those normal no-nos with the browser. It is asynchronous, but it has a bit of a learning curve, and it's still an emerging standard that's being worked through. We do not have these samples, however.
It's very simple. I mean, it's what you would expect. You can create folders, you can delete folders, you can create files, you can write to files, read from files. Binary files as well with the binary arrays. You have to use those data structures to write to a file in binary. So you can take, if you start combining with other technologies, you can take a camera picture from Get User Media, and you can transfer the data and save it to a file locally. Yeah, it's like I forgot the exact type. There's different typed arrays in JavaScript that came through the WebGL spec, and they are being used with file manipulation with sockets like across HTML5. No, it's sandboxed, right? So this is per site, per file origin, per like a URL origin. No, you cannot. If you use WebWorks, right, we give you access. We have an unsandboxing feature where you can access the whole, device. But from a standard web, using the HTML5 web APIs, it's fully sandboxed.
So that's why you would ordinarily, if you were doing it through the web, that's where the other local storage APIs would come in. Because a lot of times, I work on a game framework, and a lot of times that people have questions about accessing local files. Usually that's what they're trying to do. They want to save, some type of persistent data. Mm-hmm. And so, fortunately, there are APIs to provide that same functionality. But of course, if you were on the device and had no file access, that would start shutting some things down. So naturally, it's the origin of the application changes once it becomes local to the device. And we're very sorry we can't show those samples. And I feel so bad for Dave. He came all the way here, and then he got sick. He hasn't been able to make it to the conference at all.
So I mean, the use case here, right? The classic use case. File, if you want to store data and manage data, use IndexedDB or local storage, things like that. For file, it's used a lot in conjunction with offlining. So you want to allow, if you have a camera app, you want to allow people to take pictures, save the pictures in local file, and then when you get connectivity back, you'll upload those files over, right, to the website. So typically, I mean, there are people, I've seen some JavaScript libraries that try to do PDF and stuff like that in JavaScript. There is a pure 100% JavaScript-based PDF renderer. So you could do those types of things, but media and pictures in particular, or audio voice notes are the primary use cases that most people use those file APIs for.
So it's obviously a very rich feature set. More than storing some data, you can actually manipulate, work with many more types of data. So use it for complex things like Laurent was saying, working with media and exporting data. That wouldn't be FileReader, it would be FileWriter, but you get the idea. Where you can loop through directories, get a file handle, write that out.
Yeah.
So we don't have the example code, but it is fairly straightforward. And in true JavaScript fashion, it's working through callbacks and working through an asynchronous API. You can also use appCache. So this isn't quite the same as, so it is local data storage with HTML5. It's a little bit different than, so local storage, we're storing a string with indexDB, we're storing objects. In this case, you have control on being able to cache resources from your application. So this is something that would apply in the browser. It's something that wouldn't exactly apply as much to an installed application because you already are on the device. But this is similar to the idea, if you've ever worked with headers before, where you're working with a server and you're able to say how long an object can be cached and whether it expires and different properties like that. It's a similar idea, but it's working outside of the browser cache and it's more deliberate. We're specifically saying, I want these files to be cached, and you have more control over it. You have APIs that you can use to manage it, manage file version differences. It can be a little bit tricky depending on the browser that you're working with. Also, there's some things that can introduce unexpected behavior. For example, if a user visits your page and something is out of date, it might not display the new version until they visit again. And so you may have to keep that in mind in designing your application, that if you want something to be up to date now, it might not be up to date now for the user. It would be up to date the next time they come. But if that time they come, it's invalidated again, there'll always be one version behind. And so depending on what it is, if it's something non-essential, if it's graphics and CSS and other things like that, which are more in the presentation of your application, then this isn't something that's necessarily a bad thing. You've created an experience where they can open your site instantly, which, again, bringing an app-like experience to the user. And in BlackBerry 10, you can install, you can do a website and make it act like an application. Even though it's not installed, using something like appCache can make it open instantly. But if you're relying on that for important data, you may be a little, especially you don't do stocks or sports scores or something like that. People might get very confused by that.
But the key thing is that it's manifest-based, right? So you actually don't have APIs that you can do it per file dynamically with JavaScript. There's a lot of issues there. There's a really cool, very tongue-in-cheek presentation that's been circulating for the last 6-8 months called "The appCache is a Douchebag." And it's laced with explicit terms and stuff. The guy was really angry when he wrote this thing. But it is the most thorough explanation of all the nooks and crannies of how the appCache behaves. And it is frustrating, it is complex, but once you understand how it actually functions, it's really nice to use. And it's also part of the 25 meg.
So let's see, like we're talking about, if it's cached locally, obviously that's a faster reload time. If there's data in your site that is not cached locally, then they're only fetching the thing that they need that's new, and so that helps speed everything up. Work with it offline if they're not connected, if they don't have coverage. Cross-browser support is increasing, but it can be glitchy, and you may have to test and retest and make sure that you're caching the right things and that it's behaving the way that you want, and possibly that you're understanding the way that it's behaving. And it says that the browser still might decide not to cache something. So it's something that you cannot rely on 100%, but it's a useful tool. So here's an example manifest where you would be caching, let's see, Laurent, are we caching 3 files here?
Yes.
Only if accessed over those 2 network files, or what's the network part of this?
Very good question. I don't remember. No, sorry. So index, awesome, CSS are cached. If you are on network, you would access them through the network, login PHP, status PHP. These are endpoints of URLs. And the fallback is for when the network is not there. Again, you have to The app cache is like a wild beast. You have to give it a lot of respect. You have to go through the spec. You got to go through how to use it. There are actually frameworks out there that help you guys. But it's like the cache manifest and the name, if you put an extra space, sometimes it counts. But if you put an extra space at the end of the line, it doesn't count. There's like a lot of weird things that are involved there. It's tricky to the point that people have built cache frameworks that use the file system APIs instead. Right? So it's a little bit still of an art form. There's a lot of gotchas. And with your applications, it may be worth your time to go through and really understand it. But don't go copy-paste one example you saw somewhere on the web and put it on your site and expect magically it's just going to work. There are things that are not intuitive.
It's more flexible than using the front or header cast.
Correct. Correct.
So here's a little example if you want to enable it. So first you would create a manifest, like this example, and then you can add it to your HTML tag. So that you're going to use that manifest. And in general, like Laurent said, you don't have granular control over the API exactly in JavaScript, but you do have an ability to catch if the browser reports it, if there are errors or other things with the cache. So in this example, they added an event listener to the window application cache, and they're listening for an error. And if you get an error, it's going to give you a status, and that may help in debugging and figuring out what's going on. Here's another event handler checking if it started to download a file and checking the status on that. And here's another event handler, no update, which I'm assuming no update, Laurent, is it confirmed I don't need to update anything, I'm going to use the local cache?
Correct. It basically tells you that the local cache is there. The manifest on the server hasn't changed.
Okay.
Right? And I forgot the HTTP code. It basically does a check the same way as the regular cache headers in HTTP. So is it like I forgot the HTTP code, but it's basically a check to just check the timestamp of a file, not actually fetch the file.
So here's a list of some of the events that you can listen to check if something is cached, if it's checking the cache, if it's downloading a file, if it doesn't need to update, if something is out of date and obsolete, progress as it's downloading. Do you know what update ready is?
Update ready means it's going to go and start downloading. So, I mean, the thing with those events, it gives you actually a lot of insight about how the cache is actually working and all the dynamic stuff. But there's nothing you can do to change it. There's nothing to do with control. So it's really notification, mostly for debugging and helping. But in terms of real application code and something that would have an impact with the end user, there's really little you can do there. It's one manifest at a time, and it's the whole thing or none of it.
And yep, and so you can check the status, and it will return different values.
Yeah.
Depending on, so you can get different events through JavaScript, and then in each event it reports a status, and so it seems like it's covering the same ground, sort of.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. Again, it's just status, so I mean, you can imagine just a workflow, right? It's going to go check, am I up to date? No, okay, I have to go fetch the thing. Now I'm ready to go, right? And that's just a flag that you can monitor.
So if you're going to serve a manifest file, you want to make sure that your server is serving it with the right MIME type. Otherwise, that will cause problems. And JavaScript API, more control. So the JavaScript API here, though, is like watching through a glass window, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, right?
Yeah. And questions.
Questions, conversation. I mean, we're a little bit early here, but this is a vast topic, right? 25 megabytes is the limit. So one of the things I've seen is those different things, the data, the file system, the cache. A lot of people try to, sometimes I've seen applications that store the exact same resource. So you would actually have in CSS, and you would have UU encoded data URLs. And that would get cached in the database, but it will also be cached by the app manifest. And so it's the same resource that basically takes 3 times the space in a finite quota that you have for all storage. So how you use all those different things, how do you partition your data architecture within your application is something that requires some thought, right? Unless you're doing a fairly simple application, you just want data, local storage is really your first stop, right? Simple key value pair, putting strings around there. A lot of things on the web is string. I don't think storing JSON objects is too bad, right? So that's fine. If you want to start to do a little bit more structured data, then indexDB is where you think about it. File system has very specific use cases, caching of larger assets in a way that it's more dynamic, the offline case that I've mentioned, right? And then the appCache, personally, I give up, but that's just me, right? There are just too many gotchas, too many weird things that I can do with the other APIs quite efficiently. With combination of the offline status, right? One of the things of the appCache is that it merges local storage with offline, and you don't have to think about the transition back and forth. If you have a question, you have to go to the microphone. Well, okay, short question, I'll repeat.
Which version, are you using the most recent WebKit IndexedDB API, or are you using it?
So the question is if we're using an older version or the latest version of IndexedDB in WebKit. We are using the latest version as of a couple of months ago. We did a giant rebase. But again, it's still a spec in movement, right? So things like I discussed, some APIs will throw an exception. Some APIs will be asynchronous, and you put a handler, and they'll call you back. So clearly, the error handling kind of structure of IndexedDB is not really consistent and well thought out. This is an area that the standard body is still working on.
So till when do you expect it to stabilize?
Yeah, flip a coin. It's standards, right? So it could be done in the next few months. It could take another year.
And there's 2.
Wins based on who wins the market.
So I mean, so who wins the market is an interesting concept because everybody is working on the implementation of those APIs, and everybody is afraid of doing something that's not the standard. So there's actually a lot of conversations that are happening behind the scenes between all the players. So it's competitive when you look at it from the outside, but we have regular conversations with all the major players around those types of APIs. So we truly, in the web, want to do the right thing and work collaboratively to figure out what the right API is. But certainly, different points of view, different backgrounds, people have different opinions, and those things have to be hashed out. Right? That's standards. That's how they work. Come on, more questions. Storage is like huge. So lots of frameworks around storage. Lawnchair, store.js, right? You can look it around. I'm a big framework guy. I like frameworks, makes things simpler. Especially in smoothing out differences between different browsers. There are a couple of frameworks also, I forgot the name of it, one new framework, like a few months old, that's trying to merge completely local storage, session storage, file, and IndexedDB in kind of a unified store environment, and thinking of storage like a multiple tier. So people are innovating a lot around that, and tying it into offline, right? There was an article from Fierce Mobile a couple of weeks ago that infuriated me, where this writer wrote and said, the thing that's wrong with the web is that the web cannot deal with data, the web cannot store data, the web cannot do offline. And I'm like, if you want to blame the web, talk about complex animation performance, but yeah, I mean, there's been that for a while, and offline is now kind of good. So this is a lot of rich APIs, a lot of rich capabilities. It requires a little bit of work, but hey, you know, if you're going to build an application that can work online and offline and manage rich content and potentially large content, right? Game frameworks have to deal with this, right? How do you load all the assets for games? Audio files, video files, movie assets, right? Sprites, you name it. It's all based on those APIs. This is where you kind of kick off your web application into the next level.
This is more secure than Microsoft AppCache.
Sure. Sure.
There's the sandbox
Yeah, there was no sandbox, and
implemented. I mean, it's not being used by.
but does anyone use ActiveX anymore?
I
I'm not sure. I
I
mean,
use it for my own use.
so you're weird. Why ActiveX? What do you mean?
It's HTML5 for quick prototyping because I don't need to compile it. I just need something done now.
But sorry, but why ActiveX?
Well, because my apps needs to read files from the file machine, like saving files, reading files. I
Okay.
used to do that since IE5, I think.
Yeah. I mean, so.
That's control.
So I mean, to give some respect back, right? I mean, there was this great article a couple of months ago again, where someone was looking at all the innovations that came through IE, right? So Microsoft did a lot of weird things, a lot of proprietary things that kind of pissed everybody off. But in the time, right, things we take for granted now, asynchronous I/O, XHR, file access, all that type of stuff, all came from Microsoft in IE 5.5 and IE 6. So there are certainly a lot of technologies, but the way they approach the solutions was really with a proprietary band. And ActiveX in and of itself, right? ActiveX, I think, is disabled by default now in IE 10.
Well, it asks the users.
No.
Permission.
In IE 10 and Windows 8, it's gone.
Oh, 10, yeah.
Yeah, it's gone.
Yeah, they're doing away because of HTML5.
Just because of security. I mean, there was so many issues with ActiveX.
There's HTML5 now.
Sure.
It's standardized.
Sure.
So
But more people were using file access through Flash than through ActiveX.
up until IE6, they still use ActiveX control for the XHR.
Yes. Yeah,
But now that because HTML5 is cooked in.
sure. But before HTML5, I mean, Flash was already taking a lot of those things. So a lot of people were going around kind of cross-site scripting and stuff by doing XHR and file access through Flash. I would argue that it's not any less secure than ActiveX ever was.
ActiveX definitely is very.
Well, and I think like most things here, you really have to look at who your audience is. And so if you need something to run on IE6, then you're going to have to work with, I think ActiveX or Flash would be a good option there. Mm-hmm. And if you're going to do something that you want to run in multiple browsers, I think it's a great thing that there is a file API, and then that provides a way to access the same things. So I would argue, if possible, use the file API. It's in the browser, and you can use that to access files. If you can't do that for some reason, then Flash is probably your second best bet, because that's going to work across platforms and across browsers. But I definitely agree. In the right circumstances, I think an ActiveX control to do that could be the right thing. But we know it's not the direction Microsoft is going, but it's where they were. And
And again, if you're doing this, there are frameworks that do automatically fall back for you, so you don't have to think about it, and they are themselves responsive in terms of feature detection and figuring out what's available. So Lawnchair will use ActiveX. It's the only thing that's available, right? But I think there is. I think I saw a jQuery plugin that does storage, but I'm not sure if it's part of the standard collection. I don't think it's baked yet. Sencha does, but I think jQuery is still an area where the plugin is not fully complete. But I don't know, the only name that comes back to me is Lawnchair. I apologize, but there are like 3-4 frameworks that are really strong and that do all this type of fallback and figure out. They're all open source stuff, yeah. Huh? Lawnchair, yeah. So it's L-A-W-N and chair. Yeah, like a lawn chair. Those like long chairs that you swim, side swimming pool stuff. So if you just Google it, you'll find it. And I've named a number of articles. I recommend, again, the appCache is a douchebag. It's a riot. You will learn an incredible amount. Everything you have to know about the appCache is in that presentation. and a couple of recent articles around kind of storage technologies and all that stuff is going. It's a big area of HTML5. A lot of features, a lot of capabilities come from those APIs. Any more questions? Well, okay, I'll repeat it. Oh, okay, fine.
Like when BlackBerry 10 will launch, after that, what will be the general update cycle of the browser? Like for example, desktop browsers these days update every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
So what will be your update cycle general?
Don't know yet. I don't know yet. Right? We're still figuring out. I mean, the browser is still shipped as part of the OS image. It's not an independent separate app. And so it will really depend on the update cycle of BlackBerry 10 itself. But what is that going to be? I don't know. We haven't announced anything. I'm not sure what the carrier policy is going to be and all those things.
But for what it's, for what it's worth, so we're not into the BlackBerry 10 release cycle yet, but we do have the playbook now. And even though BlackBerry 10 is ahead of the playbook in terms of HTML5 support, where the playbook is today is, I mean, I think it's incredible. I was at jQuery conference, and there was only one person who threw anything at it that didn't work, and it was a guy who worked at Microsoft who had this big old benchmark suite, and it was taking pictures with a camera, which we know is going to be in BlackBerry 10. Other than that, everything worked, and we still are leading in terms of things like WebGL, which isn't supported in other devices and other browsers. So, so long as it's part of that image, the updates are going to come with the OS updates, which are dictated by carriers and all kinds of other details. But, I think that we're on a good track so far and a good track record for, continuing to lead the way and, and kind of providing what you need and what you want in this area. And so even if it's fun to have the cutting edge, and even if we don't have provide a way of having like a BB Next type of browser on the device, by being ahead, maybe even if we can't release on quite as fast of a schedule, they'll catch up by the time we go a few steps further.
And the thing here to highlight is that we had a presentation earlier today that kind of reviewed all the HTML5 APIs. So we are ahead, and what's left. Right? I mean, people are still creating, but there are like 4 big things, which is web audio, WebRTC, and a lot of the CSS kind of print quality kind of effects. Right? These are things that are still getting worked out. IndexedDB, for example, is still getting worked out. So I'm pretty sure, I can bet a few dollars that we will be able to update at least faster than those standard things will be able to iterate themselves.
And what is WebRTC like?
Oh, WebRTC is basically, think of it like a real-time asynchronous communication and multimedia. How do you build WebEx, right? Using pure web technologies, including screen sharing and video and all those things.
So it is live streaming.
Hmm?
It is for live streaming.
Live streaming is one example, but there's a more generic kind of how to say, messaging protocol for real-time messaging, queue-based messaging, all that type of stuff.
So we cannot use like WebSockets for something like WebEx instead of.
You could, but then you have to write all the code to take the frames. So you could build a poor man's version of it, but you have to write a lot of code, and the performance is probably not going to be there.
So WebRTC will be implementing everything, and we have to just use.
Correct.
So is that kind of a difference between opening a socket versus constantly polling?
No, the difference is that if you were to do it today with the technology, you can do get user media. You can get every single frame. You can take that frame, convert it to UU encode into a string, and then you can, or using an array, like a typed array, binary array, and you can send it through a, a socket to a server, and the server will then send that thing back to another browser. With WebRTC, first of all, it's point-to-point communication, so you don't need to go through a server anymore. A browser can talk to another browser directly. And the idea of streaming audio and video data is that built in the framework. So you just connect the 2 endpoints, and it's basically 2 video streams that you just put in your DOM. So very powerful stuff, very complex stuff under the covers. And this is kind of the next big frontier. right? That and web audio, I think, are the two big things that are going to happen next year.
So the current WebKit version is 5.37.3, and then BlackBerry 10. Would that be remain the same? Because you know,
No.
and
So,
WebWorks and the browsers are the same basically.
I'm
WebKit's
sorry.
versions.
WebWorks and the browser?
Yeah, WebWorks has to deal with the web view, right?
Yeah, it's the same.
Yeah.
I mean, the browser and WebWorks are based on the exact same web view thing. So the WebKit, but I'm confused. Are you talking about WebKit?
WebKit.
We're talking about the web views.
No, WebKits. Because
Yeah, so
you
WebKit.
use one version of WebKits.
No, we
and
don't.
your
We don't.
HTML5
We don't.
depends
So
on
if you
WebKit's
compare, if you get the version of WebKit in the beta 1 that came out in Orlando, what we have now and what will ship, right? We rebase constantly now, almost on a monthly
it will
basis.
be different?
Yeah, of course.
Oh, so I'll
It's
just
been different with every single, even single ... release update of BlackBerry 7,
yeah.
of Playbook and everything.
But the HTML5 support is gonna be based on the WebKit version, with the exception of the
So guys,
BlackBerry proprietary-
WebKit is a layout engine. A lot of that stuff that is implemented, every browser, WebKit is not a browser. WebKit, you give it HTML, it gives you a graph.
Yeah, but it has
You then
Gecko.
Huh?
The Gecko is the one that render.
Gecko is Mozilla. Gecko is
yeah,
like
Gecko-
WebKit,
Gecko
it's
is the
only a
engine.
layout engine.
Gecko is the engine that renders
No.
based on the CSS.
Layout, not rendering. The rendering is at the graphic layer, is separate from the layout engine. Gecko is architected very similarly to WebKit. So WebKit, literally, like WebKit doesn't even have JavaScript, right? What WebKit does is parse the HTML and the CSS and generates a parse tree of all the DOM. That then goes into rendering, and each platform built its own rendering, right? I mean, when you look at the actual code base of browser, WebKit is like 20% of the code base. It's a common kind of infrastructure, but a lot of the HTML5 APIs that we implemented are not in WebKit.
Oh, really?
Yeah. How do you implement the audio tag, right? All WebKit is going to do is show you in your parse tree you have an audio element. You still have to implement all the features through it.
Look at webkits.org to see which HTML5 tags it supports. And,
But it supports
Safari supports it. And
it supports the
other
tags, but
browsers.
the tag is not the implementation.
Yeah, so WebKit, in a
Right.
way, is a way to understand the language of HTML and CSS, and that's why the consistency between WebKit browsers is that if you write your CSS in a certain
even
way,
it's the same
it's understood in a
Even
common
in the
way.
same version number.
But if you look at
Absolutely.
HTML5test.com, there's no way that we could be ahead of Chrome and ahead of Safari if there weren't differences.
I mean, literally, all WebKit does, it returns to you a tree structure of the DOM. You then have to parse it and implement all the event handler, implement the JavaScript loop, all that type of stuff you have to do. Each browser does it differently.
That will be optimized for the platform.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, part of it is you start to get into device drivers, optimal graphic stuff, acceleration. Each platform has its own environment. And this is why, I mean, this is a very good point, right? You look from I think that we're pretty recent on the WebKit version. You look at Chrome, there are a lot of differences in terms of HTML5 support. Even if you try to figure out maybe it was Chrome 20 or Chrome 19, it was kind of too close to that version that we're using, you'll see big differences from one platform to another. I mean, look at Android.
How about Gecko?
So Gecko is completely different, right? Gecko has nothing to do with WebKit. Gecko is Mozilla's engine, and it's architected very similarly.
You need that engine in your
Absolutely, absolutely. Wait a minute, you need the engine in what?
browser.
In our browser? No, we don't have a single line of code of Gecko. Gecko is Mozilla only for Firefox.
But the user agent say Gecko.
Aha, so that's so
Oh, like Gecko.
like Gecko. So guys, the user agent string, right,
Like Gecko.
says nothing about what's under the cover. So we still have, I mean, it sells Mozilla 4 or 5, right? Basically, the user agent string is the worst thing that ever happened to the web. It started to go crazy when IE6 became dominating and people started to build code specifically for IE6. So Opera and Netscape at the time and other browser vendors, basically to try to convince websites that they are like IE6, that started to fake the user agent string of IE6. And then everything went to crazy. Right? Because there's still, believe it or not, there's still content management infrastructures and code there that will do specific behaviors unless Gecko is there. And same with Mozilla 5. If you change that Mozilla 5 is 10 years ago, right? This is Netscape 5. This is not even Firefox, right? So we have Gecko is a completely different technology. It's the Mozilla Firefox technology, which is completely different from WebKit. So Microsoft has its own engine that is not Gecko and not WebKit. Yeah. Yeah. Look at even IE8 does it. Even IE8 does it. Look at the user agent string from different browsers. You'll be surprised. Yeah.
Because you have a problem where historically it's like checking, is your name Joe? And if you're Joe, you know how to fast pitch. And if your name isn't Joe, all you know how to do is play t-ball because you don't know baseball. And it's like, you know, and so then you end up with this weird scenario of like, well, what if you got a new member on the team? You know, what then? And so, you know, obviously for your own applications, you want to design for features. You don't want to design for a user agent. But, you know, the difficulty of a client-side processed system is that you don't have control over the client side. And so it's a legacy thing that's still around to
But we can have that conversation separately, right? Because the user agent string is nothing but a string. It's a label. It's not even information. It's been so corrupted, right, that people are using it all for the wrong reasons. It's just backward compatibility. That's all it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's in general, it's handled by an index of. So we'll add BlackBerry, we'll add Playbook, we'll add, because people will search index of Playbook greater than -1. But the rest of it, you can kind of ignore the rest of it. We're adding something special so that you know it's BlackBerry or BB10. But the rest of it is there because older systems are checking index of Gecko, true or false, and then they'll handle the rest of it. So it's just there to keep things working.
Something like non-related to data, but I'm opening in the new update. So you are not supporting Octura or Vigi?
We're not supporting what?
Octura, OGG file.
Okay, so this is like file formats, but this is media. So OGG, we support audio, but I don't think we support video, because video still has some patent issues in the OGG spec that are still controversial. Audio is clean, and so that we use audio. No comment. We don't. Do we intend to support WebM? Don't know. No plans currently. Could always happen, but right now it's just not on our radar.
Right now for audio, for like games, etc., we can use OGG or MP3.
For audio, yes, and PCM.
And PCM is this.
Yeah.
And for video, we have to use either MP4 or.
Correct. Okay, well, thank you very much.